Welcome to the Language Fuel podcast. Our mission is to fuel the teaching and learning of languages worldwide. I'm your host, Joanna Smith. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Language Fuel podcast. This is episode number 24. Today on the podcast, I'm interviewing Jackie Bolen. Now, Jackie has had experience language teaching. She taught in South Korea for more than 10 years. So we talk about her journey into that. How did she get started? What kind of professional development did she have? What's then next in her life? So it's a very interesting interview. Unfortunately, we actually had to record the interview twice because we had a technical problem the first time. So I really appreciate Jackie's time giving us a second round there. Unfortunately, also in the second round, we had a few sound issues. So in some parts of the interview, you'll hear a little bit of feedback, but don't worry too much about that. It does stop after a few seconds. So just bear with us with the sound quality here. And I thank Jackie for her time, and I hope you enjoy this podcast. Welcome, Jackie. It's great to have you on this podcast. And just for the listeners, this is actually our second conversation since we had a little technical issue in the first one. But I really appreciate, you being willing to have a conversation and have a chat, because I think you have some really valuable websites that my listeners might be really interested in. And we'll get to that in a minute. But first of all, before we talk about what you have online and that, would you mind just telling me a bit about your journey in the ESL industry so far?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on your podcast. And I got started in the ESL industry like a lot of people did after university. And I just wanted to travel and have some fun. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do after uni. So I went to South Korea for a year, and that was about 15 years ago, I guess, was my first time. And back then, I actually wanted to go to Japan, was my number one choice, but it was super difficult to get a job in Japan. So I ended up going to South Korea to work at a hagwon, which is a cram school, for a year. And I got that job on the basis of like a 5-minute interview, and then they sent me a plane ticket in the mail, and it was strangely easy to get a job. But now things have definitely tightened up, and it's actually one of the harder countries to jump through all the paperwork hoops. But yeah, back then it was just super easy. So I did that for a year, and then I came back to Canada and went to grad school for a couple of years, and then traveled around the US for a few months. And then I finished grad school, and I had been thinking about Korea that whole time and just really missing it. And I had a good experience in my first year. So I decided to go back, but my goal was to get university jobs, which I was now qualified for with my master's degree. So I went back for about 9 more years and worked at 2 different universities. One did south of Seoul, and then one in Busan, which is the big port city in the south of Korea.
Right. And just to clarify, I mean, you'd gone back and done a bunch of study, but as far as I understood from our previous conversation, the studies, they were not actually in the field of, say, teaching. It was psychology or something, right?
Yeah, I did both my undergrad and graduate degree in psychology, and I wanted to actually be a professor was my goal for going to grad school, to do a PhD and go down that route. But I just discovered that people had more motivation and financial resources and all of that kind of stuff than I did. So I decided to go back to teaching. And during my time in Korea, I ended up doing the CELTA and the DELTA, which were really good experiences. And it was good to have some paper, I guess, qualifications related to teaching to go along with my non-teaching paperwork that I had.
Yeah. So to kind of go back to that first job that you got, and you mentioned it was fairly easy to get. So I guess at that stage, which is many years ago now, they were just keen to have anyone who could sort of speak English and who had a degree, right? They weren't looking for specific training in teaching. Is that right?
It was, the only there was 2 main requirements, I guess. It was to have a bachelor's degree, and then to be from one of the big 6 countries. So Australia, New Zealand, Canada, US, South Africa, or the UK. So or not even be from there, but to have a passport from there. Yeah. So that was it. It was really easy to get a job back then.
So, yeah, so I guess it's kind of being thrown in the deep end. And what was your experience of that, without having any formal training in teaching English and then having to suddenly be in a classroom? Like, how was that for you?
Well, I taught kindergarten kids for the morning, which I
Mm.
hated. And even to this day, I will not like babysit little kids. I
Right.
like kids that are like maybe 8 or 9 years old or older. I think
Hmm.
they're great and I love hanging out with them. But yeah, just little kids, it was super, super tough.
Yeah.
And I just remember they couldn't like hold a pencil. They couldn't read in Korean. And I was like, why am I teaching them how to read in English when they don't even know like the Korean alphabet? This seems like
Yeah.
so crazy
Yeah.
actually right now. And like they're three
Yeah.
years old. Why am I making them sit in a desk? They should be like running around playing and being happy
Right.
and being little children. So it
Yeah.
was kind of a hard year for sure. And actually that was the last time I ever taught kindergarten kids. That was kind of like just a hard
Mm.
limit that I had. I just never would teach little kids again. So
Mm.
after that, I taught elementary school students for a year, and then I would do like various summer camps and winter camps, and I was teaching some
Hmm.
universities for elementary school students and middle school students or whatever, and I really enjoyed that. But
Yep.
yeah, just not the kindergarten kids. It was a terrible year, actually, in regards to the teaching. Not living in Korea, but just the teaching wasn't a great
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, and I mean, teaching preschoolers that young, there's a whole bunch of just fundamental human development going on, let alone, kind of educational things. They're just developing as little people, they need to figure a whole bunch of stuff
Yeah,
out. So it's a very, very tricky thing. But on the positive, I guess, I mean, at that age, they wouldn't necessarily need a huge amount of formal input because their brains are still like sponges. So I imagine they probably actually learnt quite a lot of English just from hearing you, if nothing
yeah.
else. Their brains would have put the pieces together. So,
For sure. Yeah, there was a lot of those kids who like started in that kindergarten program and then like 2 years later, 2.5 years later, I guess, when they graduated from kindergarten, like they were kind of fluent in English. It was kind of crazy actually. So
yeah,
you're right, even though, yeah, they just ended up picking up a
yeah.
lot, even though maybe the foreign teachers with no experience and no qualifications, we didn't really know what we were doing, but they still figured it out, I
Yeah.
guess. So
And I
yeah.
think that's a wonderful age group to illustrate the idea that, it's actually about acquiring a language. It's not necessarily about teaching. So as a teacher, it's sort of like people acquire language despite what we may be teaching them. You never quite know. And certainly at that age, they're learning so fast. They're learning everything really, really fast with their wonderful young brains. But
Yeah,
anyway, I can
yeah, for
definitely
sure.
understand how stressful that is. And yeah, even as a mother myself, I have to say that, I'm very conscious. Some mothers are much more enjoy different stages of childhood, and not everybody enjoys that preschool kind of year. So I totally relate anyway, just on a personal level. But so I guess I'm quite
Yeah.
curious about this, the fact that some countries have a whole bunch of, I guess, unqualified. I mean, you did end up qualifying and then teaching in a different institution, but do you think that other people who didn't go down that qualification route, do some of them thrive anyway and find their natural teachers, or do some of them struggle, like you did in your first year, but then I guess in other environments as well? What's your experience there in terms of the people who go without any qualifications?
Just from what I've seen, there's people who are extremely well qualified on paper,
Hmm.
with like masters in TESOL or linguistics or whatever, and just I've taught next to many of them at the two universities I worked at, and the walls are thin, and you can hear what's going on, and I would sometimes hear the craziest things. I would think like, oh my God, what is he doing? Like
Right.
that is how is he teaching like that? That seems crazy. Like
Mm.
totally teacher centered, just like lecturing for, I don't know, like an hour and not having any student talking to
Yep.
them or just like feedback or like replicating nothing. But for me, I mean, doing this Alta and Delta like really helped me. But
Yes.
I think you have to be kind of a natural teacher to start with for
Mm.
it to help you. But there's just some people who are not suited to teaching. It doesn't matter what people who maybe don't have formal qualifications, but they're quick on their feet and they pick stuff up and they like are reading stuff online and talking to people and going to conferences,
Mm.
and maybe they're just natural teachers and they can overcome the lack of
Yeah.
formal qualifications. So it's kind of a mixed bag, I think, with that,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. And I think that's a really, really good point that some people are naturally wired that way and they do pick up in the networking, as you say, learning from other people, attending conferences, you can actually, that does have a huge impact on your ability. And I would agree with you, even the most qualified teachers, sometimes have bad days or whatever, but aren't necessarily always the best teachers. So yeah, that's a really great point there. So you were there so you got out of the preschool teaching, did a few things, and you went to the university. Can you tell me about maybe on the other end of the spectrum some really positive experiences that you had in the teaching? You obviously did it for quite a while, so you must have really enjoyed it after that.
Yeah, I did it for about 9 more years. So I worked 5 years at one university and then 4 years at the second one. And yeah, I had lots of like amazing students and great coworkers, and working at a university is quite fun because there's lots of like staff parties, and it's just like, it's just a really good atmosphere, I think. And in terms of the classes I taught some basic conversational classes, which was fine, just to like, if for freshmen in Korea, they're usually required to take 1 year of conversational English. So I did that. But at the second university I worked at, I got a job in the English department. So I taught only English majors. So they had chosen English as their subject. So I taught some advanced things like presentations and public speaking and advanced academic writing and stuff like that. And yeah, I just found it quite interesting, like teaching more content, I guess, as opposed to just conversational English. Yeah.
Great. And, when we were talking the other day, you mentioned you really enjoyed that academic writing class in particular, which surprises me because I know a lot of people who don't like to teach academic writing. But what do you think you liked about it?
Most of the work. I think first of all, I liked it because, and I liked presentations as well for the same reason, was because I was teaching skills that students could take with them into like the real world, their other classes or work situations, just for the rest of their life, like knowing how to write properly with like topic sentences and a thesis statement and a hook and things like that is valuable for anything that you're writing.
Yes.
And presentations, of course, like public speaking skills apply to like a huge range of situations. So I like that best of all, I think. And I was at that point when I started teaching those classes, I guess I was just really tired of teaching about the weather and sports and hobbies and movies. I just felt like I couldn't teach, or like and then the grammatical concept, simple past and like all that, like one more time. I was just so tired of it. So I was so happy to just get away from that and get into something else.
Yeah, and that's a great point as well. I love the two things I'm picking up from there. One is that, knowing that your students are getting a skill that, as you say, is actually applies to many different things in their life. So structuring presentations and writing and things like that. So that satisfaction of giving them transferable skills, but also I think I can see that for you it was a career advancement as well. So, really stretching your own skills and your own abilities as a teacher to teach the more complex subjects. So everybody needs to feel that they're growing in their career. So that's great as well.
Yeah, for sure. It was a lot of like preparation and a bit of a learning curve to do that. But yeah, it was a good challenge for sure.
Yeah. So I'm curious about your decision to go back to Canada. So after 9 years, I mean, you'd sort of think you have settled in a place. So how did that decision go for you in wanting to go back to your home country?
I mean, there was a few different reasons. Like the one reason was just that I wanted to start my life in Canada before I was too old. So I ended up leaving Korea, I think, when I was like 36 or something like that. So yeah, it was easy enough to come back and find work or go back to school or just whatever I wanted to do. And then another part of it was just that I was pretty tired of teaching and I was tired of Korea, and I was becoming less and less happy living there as the years went on. So I didn't want to get to the point where like a lot of expats ended up leaving Korea when they hate it and they're bitter and angry and Korea's this terrible place. So I never wanted to get to that point. I just wanted to leave and have like lots of happy memories and remember my time there in like a good or a positive light instead of really negative. So yeah, those were the two main reasons why I decided to leave when I did.
Fantastic. Now, let's move on to, I guess, you're back in Canada now, and I mean, I found you online because you do have a bunch of ESL websites, but my understanding is that you're not actually doing any actual teaching at the moment?
No, I was actually just really tired of teaching, so I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to take some time off. So I'm not ruling out ever going back to that. I think I liked it when I was teaching, but I just need a few years, I think, of not
Mm-hmm.
doing it. And
Yep.
yeah, so I work, yeah, as you mentioned, I do the ESL websites, and I've also self-published quite a few books related to ESL teaching. And then I also work part-time in the movie industry in Vancouver as a first aid attendant. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's
This
kind
is
of a good
super
mix of like the
varied.
online
Yeah.
thing and then
Yeah.
doing that as well.
That's great. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about your ESL websites? What are you can absolutely feel free to tell us where my listeners can find you, and tell us what sort of content they'll find on there.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, the main hub where you can see all my websites and books I have listed is jackiebolen.com. So it's spelled JACKIEBOLEN.com. And then there's a tab at the top with books, and then a tab about websites, and then you can also contact me through that website. But
Mm-hmm.
the three websites that your reader or your listener might be most interested in, two of them are related to ESL activities. So one is eslactivities.org, and then the other one is eslspeaking.org. So it's just
Mm-hmm.
activities and games that you can use for the classroom. And yeah, I have lots of like things like top 10 ESL icebreakers, top 10 ESL kids games, and things like that. So I hope it's super helpful and your readers can just get some quick ideas if they are doing lesson planning or something like that. So that's my goal for those two websites.
Yep.
And
Perfect.
then I have one other website it's called My Life Teaching in a Korean University. So you can probably just find it super easily by Googling My Life Teaching in a Korean University, or the URL is teachinginkoreanuniversity.com. And that's just everything related to how to get a university job.
Mm-hmm.
I talk a lot about money and like finance and salaries and that kind of stuff for ESL
Mm-hmm.
teachers. And then I do like textbook reviews and writing classes and professional development for ESL teachers, evaluation and like writing
Fabulous.
or grading writing rubrics. Yeah, there's tons of stuff. So just have a look around. And there's a whole bunch of different topics. So
Yeah,
yeah.
great. And what do you, I mean, I'm thinking that last one in particular, fantastic for people who are thinking of also doing a journey or a trip overseas like you did. So that's just brilliant. What are the most popular topics that you see from sort of the back end of your website that people are accessing?
People seem to love like the top 10 posts related to a specific like ESL activity. Because a lot of the websites that talk about ESL activities, they just have them all lumped together in
Hmm.
alphabetical order or something. But if you're
Yeah,
searching for like, I want a speaking activity for kids, or I want some fun icebreakers to use at the start of class, or first day of class, what should I do? What sort of activities can I use to help the students mix and get to know each other and
hmm
that kind of thing?
hmm
If you're searching through like a big alphabetical list or something, you'll just waste so much time. So
right.
people come to my website searching for super specific
Yeah,
things like that, or something like simple past board game, ESL board game, or something
perfect.
like
Yeah.
that. And then they
hmm
find a lot of stuff like that. So yeah.
Great. So it's really, really practical. And I think that's wonderful, to save people time. Just say, hey, I need something in the next kind of 20 minutes. I'm about to run a class, and what can I do at the beginning? I need a quick warmer. So that's fantastic to have those practical options
For
there.
sure.
Great.
Yes.
Um, that's fantastic, and I really hope that some of our readers can make use of those websites. So thank you for sharing that. I guess we're coming towards the end of our time now. I wonder if I was to ask you, say you're speaking to someone who's at the beginning of their teaching career or even considering starting teaching, they haven't yet, maybe even thinking of going overseas or something. What advice would you give to a person like that?
Well, I think first of all, you need to decide if it's going to be, well, I guess you don't need to decide, but you should eventually decide
Hmm.
if it's ESL teaching is going to be just for 1 year or if you're going to do it for longer and make kind of a career out of it. So if it's just one for 1 year, just go and have fun like I did my first year in Korea, and don't worry too much about getting qualified as a teacher. But
Hmm.
if you decide that you're going to do it for more than a year or like at least 3 or 4 or 5 years, I strongly recommend getting some qualifications like the CELTA at the minimum, and perhaps the Delta or a master's in TESOL or something like that, because it opens up so many more doors in terms of teaching jobs. And it's just hard to emphasize how much better, like just I'll take my context of Korea, for example. A hagwon job is the worst job. You have to worry about getting paid every month and you get ripped off. You teach like so many classes. Public school jobs are not bad, but you're dealing with co-teachers and it's a bit of a hassle, and maybe you have a great co-teacher and it's a great year, or you can have the co-teacher from hell and it's like your worst year of your entire life, so that kind of stuff. Or if you have some serious qualifications, you can get university jobs, and they are just so much better than the hagwon jobs. Like I can't even compare them really, probably like 500 times better. So get qualified and get better and better jobs, and you'll just have a much better, stress-free, happier experience teaching ESL abroad. And you can also make the jump to places like the Middle East with some serious qualifications where the real high-paying jobs are. So
fantastic. And that's wonderful advice, especially because it's, rooted in your own personal experience. So I really appreciate that. Well, thank you so much, Jackie, for your time today. And in fact, it's the second time we've had this conversation. So I really, really appreciate your time speaking to me today, and obviously for my listeners on the podcast being able to hear your experiences. And I wish you all the best.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was great to chat with you.
Thank you for listening to the Language Fuel podcast. You can navigate to the show notes and links via our homepage at www.languagefuel.com. See you next time.